Hi everyone, welcome to English 112. My name is Lillian Ruiz and I'm the instructor for the class. And normally we would be meeting in person, but as you know, there's nothing normal about these times. Therefore, this class is online. But what I'm going to try to do is duplicate as much as possible as what I would have done if we were meeting in person. So what I'll do today is to introduce the class and give you a little bit of a sense of what it is we'll be doing over the course of this semester. I like to start slowly as I realize people are adding and dropping and settling in and so forth. And then what we can do next class is begin talking a little bit about what literature is, which is what the whole point of this semester is. But what you will see at the top of the Moodle page is that there are several sections there that will probably be useful to you. And the section I wanted you to look at right now is syllabus and other documents, where I have uploaded the electronic copy of the syllabus that I would have submitted to you in person in class. And what I would have done in the first class is reviewed that syllabus, which is what I'm going to be doing now. And you can see that there are 3 sections of this particular class. It doesn't make a difference as to which section you're in because it's the exact same course. And you can see that this class is being offered via Moodle asynchronously, which means that there are no required Zoom meetings for this particular course. My name is up there, Lillian Ruiz, and most students almost always ask, well, what should I call you? Feel free to call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal, or anything else that feels comfortable to you. I like to run a informal, relaxed atmosphere. My phone number is there where you could leave a voice message. My email is there. Do note that my email address is just my surname, not my first initial, because believe it or not, when I started at GCC 28 years ago, we had not instituted an email system yet. So in the early days, email was distributed by purely surname until it was discovered that wasn't a very efficient way of doing it. So you can get a sense as to how long someone's been on campus based on their email address. And I teach mostly English classes, but I also teach public speaking classes and I also teach media classes as well. So I teach a little bit of everything. You can see that what I've done is I've put together an optional chat room so that if you wanted, you could interact with me via chat, and that's on our Moodle page. And that is on Tuesdays from 1 to 1:30. And of course, you can always make an appointment to meet with me as well, but every Tuesday from 1 to 1:30, I should be in that optional chat room if you just wanted to pop in and chat with me and or with your classmates. Same thing with Thursday. Our optional Moodle Zoom would be on Thursdays from 1 to 1:30. Again, not required, but if you want to meet with me or your classmates via Zoom, we can do that. Now, I chose these times because the class would normally meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And actually, what I'm doing is I will be posting a class video, and it will be available for you by Tuesday at 10 a.m. and Thursday at 10 a.m., so twice a week. And basically, those would be the substitute for the 2 in-class meetings we would have had during the week. And then what I will do at the ending of each video is post an attendance question so that you could answer that on our class discussion forum, which happens to be another area at the top of our Moodle page. And that counts as your attendance, if you will, for the day. And you are not required to respond to any of your other classmates, but I do ask that you read all of their responses and my responses back, because that's the best way you're going to be able to duplicate what would occur during class discussion. But I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. You can see that while I don't have a technical time for an office hour, you could certainly make an appointment with me outside of our optional chat and Zoom meetings. And you can do an appointment with me via Zoom, via chat room, via telephone, whatever's comfortable for you. Again, I want to try to be as flexible as possible. 2 textbooks are required for this class. The first is entitled The Bedford Introduction to Literature. The 11th edition is the edition that I ordered for this class. But that said, you can use an older edition. Your page numbers will be different, but you should be able to find all of the text. So if that's more cost effective for you, finding an older edition online, feel free to do that. I'm also going to try whenever possible to add electronic links for the readings we'll be doing. There aren't electronic links available for everything that would be included in the textbook because of copyright issues, but most of the literature I have been able to find online electronically. And you'll see that there's one more text. It was a drama that used to be included in your textbook that no longer is, a drama entitled A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, one of my favorite dramas, and I thought it was worth the additional dollars to buy a paperback version of that. Or, again, you can find the electronic link to that, which I will provide to you when we get to that particular point in the semester. Or you can also do an interlibrary loan or buy a used text, whatever the case may be. With the note that it's assumed that you will have a good dictionary thesaurus for reference, and I know that just about every computer system is loaded with it. But that said, just because you have access to one, that doesn't necessarily mean you use one regularly. And I do want to encourage you to get into the habit of using both a dictionary, where you can find more than just definitions and spellings. You can find things like word histories, the etymology, and also to use the thesaurus, where you get synonyms, words that have similar meanings. Cold and frigid, for instance, would be an example of two synonyms. And occasionally you can find antonyms. You can find opposites. For instance, hot and cold, for instance, would be two antonyms. Wonderful resources to help you with developing your own writing, because in addition to reading the writing of some of the great masters, the literature that we call it, but you will also be doing your own writing, and what you will be doing is analyzing and interpreting their works, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well. Under the course description, you can see that basically this class builds and extends on the academic writing process and skills introduced in English Composition 1. You develop close reading abilities for a variety of literary and non-literary texts, hone critical thinking skills, as well as research and documentation skills, using a variety of texts that will include things like essays, fiction, poetry, drama. Writing assignments will emphasize the formal, researched, and documented essay. But there are also possibilities for more creative experiments, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. Course readings include a selection from a wide variety of authors, genres, and texts that engage students in literary analysis. And you can receive credit for only one of the three options we offer for what we call Composition 2. The first option is English 112, and that's the section that you happen to be enrolled in, where we are reading short story, drama, and poetry, and analyzing those particular texts. English 114 provides you with the opportunity of writing your own short stories, dramas, and poems, in addition to analyzing the texts of others. And English 116 offers you the opportunity to analyze cinema, as well as analyze the texts of others. And the prerequisite is what we call English Composition 1 at GCC, which is an English 101 class or something that would be comparable. In other words, you've already gone through how to write a paper. So basically what we're doing is refining and developing those skills. So if you think you do not have the prerequisite for this class, please let me know, and we'll talk about what options are available for you. And you can see under learning outcomes that as a result of successfully completing this course, students will be able to, 1, develop an appreciation for and understanding of literature, which is how we're going to begin this semester and trying to determine what literature is and why it is we read it. Number 2, recognize reading and writing as an ever-evolving process. I know that I've had friends who are not in academia who ask, well, don't you get tired of reading the same text again? And my answer is no, that each time I go to a text, if it has enough depth and sophistication to it, well, then I can always find a new interpretation, or better yet, my students can find a new interpretation. And that's why we continue to read masters like Shakespeare year in and year out. Number 3, use the rules of formal academic writing. This is also the writing of business. So this is how you can translate these rules over into your work life. But also you want to implement your own unique sense of voice in writing. You don't want to sound like me or the textbook. You want to sound like yourself. So how do you follow the rules but also maintain your own individuality? To improve oral and written communication skills, and I have that on all of my syllabi. Regardless of the course. It could be a media course or it could be a public speaking course. And then finally, to effectively utilize word processing, email, search engines, and the internet. And the idea is to be effective with it. How can we use our time most efficiently? And how can we find the best resources that are available? So, under procedures, I'm explaining how I've adapted this class for this new online environment. That I will post a video of myself discussing class material by the time our class would normally meet in person. And that's Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. And then you'll see that you have a 24-hour deadline to watch the video for that class and answer the corresponding attendance question in our class discussion forum. And feel free to ask me for an extension if you need additional time. There's no problem with that. I understand that we are all in very challenging times right now. Your answer on the discussion forum is your attendance for the class. And there is a component to your grade based on attendance, which I'll talk about shortly. Any additional interaction you have with your classmates on the discussion forum is considered participation, the same way you would have class participation in a live class by perhaps raising your hand. And I realize that some students learn best by participating and others learn best by quietly listening. So you can decide how much or how little you want to participate. I think they're all valid ways to learn. You should, however, as I had indicated earlier, read all of the discussion forum responses from your classmates, from myself too, so for optimal learning. And then I will hold an optional class chat session on Tuesdays from 1 to 1:30, optional Zoom class session on Thursdays from 1 to 1:30. No penalty for not attending those sessions. Think of it as another opportunity for participation, if you will, or to touch base with me. Or, of course, you can, again, make an appointment with me. And then any written assignments we have over the semester, things such as journals, papers, and ultimately our final exam, which we will all discuss as the semester progresses, I ask that you send that to my email, which again is my surname, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu via PDF. And that allows my grading program to be able to access that document, write comments on it, and then return it back to you with my feedback to your email. Course requirements, fairly straightforward. You're expected to complete all of the reading and the writing assignments by the due dates. We will have 2 formal papers over the course of the semester. One approximately midway through the semester, and then the other towards the ending of the semester. So in other words, we would have had some time to talk about how to write a paper before your first paper is due. You'll also be submitting periodic journal entries discussing your reactions and thoughts and feelings about the readings that we're doing. And this is a more informal kind of writing assignment that I'll discuss in the journal section that's coming up. There's also a final exam, and it happens to be an essay examination, but it is open book, open note, and you would have 24 hours to take that final examination. Under the Institutional Services Disability Statement section, you might be familiar with this if you've taken other classes at GCC, but I just wanted to reiterate that GCC values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities and is committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. So the goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. If there are aspects of the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement, please notify the instructor, that would be me, as soon as possible. If you are a student with a disability and may need reasonable academic accommodations, you can contact the Office of Disability Services, and the contact information is there, their website, as well as their phone. And I also wanted to highlight the GCC Wellness Center in that, and this is probably an understatement, these are challenging times, as we all know. So if you're struggling for any reason and believe that that might impact your performance in this course, please contact our learning support counselor, Kathleen Cow in the GCC Wellness Center, and her email is there, as well as her phone number for support, resources, and or referrals. So under the response journal, I had indicated that there were going to be some informal writing assignments over the course of the semester, actually 3 times over the course of the semester, divided approximately a third of the way into each section of the semester. And you can see that under the response journal section, it indicates that reading and writing is an ongoing process. So the journals are meant as an opportunity for you to discuss your reactions to the readings. Think of it as kind of like your note-taking. Guidelines, very informal, because each student should use the journals as an opportunity to explore the literature in the way the student feels is most beneficial. That said, I'll occasionally give you some suggestions in class, and some of our attendance questions could perhaps inspire you as well. But on the whole, journals should reflect the thoughts and questions. Sometimes the questions are more important than the answers when it comes to literature that the student has about the readings. I think it's a good idea to record these thoughts immediately after completing the reading assignment when the ideas are still fresh. But I've had some students say that they prefer to wait until there's been some class discussion about that text, and then they can refer back to it, whatever feels comfortable to you. These journals also provide an excellent opportunity to brainstorm and free write paper topics, and I will be distributing paper topics over the course of the semester, but they will be merely suggestions. You can create your own paper topic as long as you get it approved by me eventually when we get to that particular point in the semester. It's also a good way to sort of anticipate final exam questions. Not that you can write your own final exam questions, but you might be able to guess something that might be on a final exam. And that's not cheating. That's just very good preparation and seeing how the class is put together. These journals are evaluated in a very informal manner. I do not read them for grammar or mechanics, merely for content, as if we were having a conversation on paper. And they are graded on a checkmark system. So a plus would be excellent. A check plus is good. A satisfactory is a check. Less than satisfactory is check minus. Unsatisfactory minus. And most of the grades end up in the check plus or the good section. Late journals, will lower your grade by 1 full grade, and no late journal will be accepted after 1 week has elapsed unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. So what does that mean? Ask for an extension. I'll be happy to grant it to you. I've always done this in all of my classes, even prior to the pandemic, but I think it's particularly important now. So if you do need additional time, please don't become anxious about it. Just ask me, and I'll be happy to give it to you. Submit the journals the way you would submit your papers to me, to my email as a PDF, so that I can evaluate it in my grading program and then return that back to you. And you can see that under attendance, again, what I'm going to be trying to do under attendance is to sort of duplicate what might happen with attendance by having you watch a class video twice a week and then respond to an attendance question. So class activity and your discussion responses, the discussion, if you will, is extremely important, cannot be made up. So absences and tardiness can be negatively reflected in your participation grade. While each case is different, anything more than 2 absences could lower your grade. So you have 2 times in which you could miss a video entirely. That said, you can always go and look at a video after the fact. Again, if it turns out you need additional time, just ask me and I'll be happy to allow you to do that. You don't need to notify me if you're going to be absent for or miss a video for a particular class. However, do speak with me if you start to miss multiple ones in a row. And again, if you needed additional time to watch a class video, you all have 24 hours. But if you need additional time to watch and respond to the attendance question, please just ask me. Consultations, you can meet with me during chat room and Zoom times, or also by appointment. And I have a section here on papers where basically it's more about the formatting, that papers are due via PDF on the days specified to my email. The papers should be double spaced and have 1-inch margins. I'm hopeful that you talked about this formatting in English 101, but we will also review it again in this class. Numbering your pages with a cover page, which is just a separate sheet of paper that lists the paper title, your name, the course and section number, my name, the due date. Late papers will lower your grade by 1 full grade. No late paper will be accepted after a week has elapsed unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. Again, ask me for an extension and I'll be happy to grant it to you. Be sure to keep a copy of any paper you submit for yourself, always a good idea. And paper assignments will be distributed during the term, and you have the option of rewriting our first paper, which will be due approximately about midway through the semester or so, a quarter of the semester to midway through the semester. You have the option to revise paper number 1 if you so choose. So you can hand in your first paper, which is going to be approximately 4 to 5 pages of a literary analysis, a critical paper. In other words, you wouldn't be doing outside research. That said, if you really do want to do outside research, you and I can negotiate. But part of the purpose of this class is to teach us how to read literature on our own without having to rely on what other individuals have said about that particular piece of literature. So approximately 4 to 5 pages, double spaced. And what I will do is I will evaluate your papers, both for grammar and mechanics as well as content, unlike the journals. And unlike the journals, I wouldn't use a checkmark system for a grade. What I would do is put a traditional letter grade, return that back to you. And then you have the option of taking my comments into account and rewriting your paper for a higher grade. And you get the higher of the 2 grades, so the lower grade disappears. So, and you've got up until the ending of the semester to submit in that revision, but the sooner the better for everybody involved. And again, I don't think that this is in any way my giving you some sort of an unfair advantage. This is really the way that professional authors write, is they go through multiple revisions. So I wanted you to all have the opportunity to do that with your first paper as we're learning how to write an academic analysis. So you all have the option of improving your grade in that way. The second paper will be due at the very ending of the semester, so there probably would not be time to revise it. But the idea is that you've already learned how to write a paper through your first paper, so therefore you're just duplicating those skills with a different piece of literature. That said, I have had a few students in the past rewrite their second paper if they've submitted it in early enough and they've negotiated with me. So that is a possibility. I just ask that with your revision that you submit in the original graded paper with my comments along with your revision. And I realize I'm giving you a lot of information all at once. I don't expect you to remember all of this. This is just the overview of what the entire semester is. Obviously, we'll talk about all these pieces more in depth as the semester progresses. And I'm going to skip the plagiarism section. I'll just talk about that next class. Go to the grading section, which I know is the section that probably is of most interest to you. 10% is participation, so that means answering those attendance questions. And again, any other participation you wanted to engage in, you're free to decide whether to do that or not do that, the same you would with the live class if you wanted to talk in class as opposed to not talk in class. But obviously you wouldn't be doing it in class. You would be doing it via chat room or through Zoom or through our discussion forum. Journal number 1, 15%. And basically the journals usually are approximately 3 pages long or so. What the journals are going to ask you to do is to select 3 pieces of literature from each of the units we are studying this semester. Our first unit will be on short story. Our second unit will be on drama. Third unit will be on poetry. And basically, if I asked you to select 3 short stories in the short story unit, I would ask you to write approximately a page or so on each short story that you select, and that would get you to approximately 3 pages. But again, it is an approximation. It can be as long or as short as you'd like. And again, I don't read those journals for grammar or mechanics. I'm looking for content, but it's a way for you to engage a little bit more with 3 of the short stories than you would with the whole of the short stories that we'll be reading in the short story section. And perhaps one of the short stories you write about in your journal, you might decide to devote a paper to, where you could do a more in-depth analysis of several pages, let's say 4 to 5 pages. But not required. You can always write a paper on something very different than what you wrote your journals about. So you'll do a journal with the selection of 3 short stories in our short story unit when we are done with short stories. And that'll take several weeks into the semester. And then we'll move to our drama section, and we are going to read 3 dramas. And again, at the ending of the drama section, you would write another journal, devoting about a page or so for each of the dramas that we've read, and also viewed, because dramas are meant to be viewed. And that would be your second journal. And then finally, your last journal would be to select 3 poems out of the poetry unit, out of the several poems that we will be discussing in the poetry unit, certainly many more than 3, and then you can focus on 3 of them. And For paper number 1, that's going to be on short story, and that will be your first paper. That's about 4 or 5 pages long. That paper will be due after your journal is submitted into me and returned to you on short story, so hopefully that journal can assist you. Paper number 2 is due or is based on drama, and that'll be due after you hand in your drama journals and you've received them back from me. Again, hopefully that will be of assistance to you. And paper 2 is similar to paper 1, approximately 4 to 5 pages. And then finally, you would be handing in a journal on poetry where you select 3 poems. But by that point, we will be at the ending of the semester. We would have run out of time for a 3rd paper. But we will have a final exam. And the final exam will be an essay exam that's going to ask you, or the bulk of it, 80%, is going to ask you out of a group of poems that I've selected from the poems we've read in the poetry section, for you to choose 2 and to analyze and interpret those particular poems. So again, your journal should have assisted you as well as what we would have talked about in class as well. So the bulk of the final is based on poetry, since you would not have an opportunity to write a paper about poetry. And that would be 80%. And then the other 2 sections of the final, each worth 10%, a short section on short story and a short section on drama, just to flesh out the entire semester. For an A, excellent, and a B, good, and a C, satisfactory. There are letters that follow C in the grading scheme, but I always suggest that you concentrate on the first 3, especially at the very beginning of the semester. And you can see that I also have some criteria for essay evaluation here that we will be revisiting when we start talking about writing an academic paper, about what an A paper looks like, and a B, and a C, and so forth. Now I wanted to move forward to the course outline. And this is basically a template of what it is, or a guideline of what it is that we're going to be doing over the course of the semester in its entirety. With a disclaimer at the top that dates and assignments may be subject to change. And also assigned readings should be completed before the dates indicated. So you can see here that the dates for each Tuesday and Thursday are listed here. And again, by 10 a.m. of that Tuesday and Thursday, you'll have a video, if not before. And today was devoted purely to introduction, where we are in week 1, class 1 on the 26th, where I review the syllabus. Next class, Thursday, what that video is going to be addressing are some of the sections in the textbook. If it turns out that you don't have the textbook yet or you can't read those sections, panic not. If we were meeting in person, I would have expected that anyway. So I would have been doing a lot of filling in for individuals as they were still getting their text. But basically, you can tell from the headings of the sections some of the content that we would be talking about reading imaginative literature, critical strategies for reading, and reading fiction. And this is not the literature that we'll be reading. This is more about how do you go about reading literature. It can be a little bit dry, but I wanted to begin talking about some techniques before we actually began reading some literature itself. And that begins in week 2. As I indicate, I like to start slowly, so in my mind, the class really begins next week on Tuesday, where we are going to compare 2 short stories, one entitled The Secret Sorrow and the other entitled The Sorrowful Woman. While they have similar titles, they're both very different. We'll continue to talk about elements of reading and writing, such as how to write about a fiction. On the 4th of February, that Thursday, we'll talk about a short story entitled The Story of an Hour that was actually embedded in the earlier set of readings that you will be doing for this upcoming Thursday, but I wanted us to read that short story on its own as a piece of literature. We'll also talk about reading in the writing process. You can see in week 3, other short stories we'll be reading, which you may or may not have familiarity with. A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. And there's even a brief interview from the author about his thinking when he constructed that story. I have you skimming the glossary of literary terms in your textbook. And by skim, I do mean skim, not read. Wanted you to be aware that there are literary terms and that you have access to them in the text at the end. I will be talking about some of those literary terms as the semester progresses. On the 11th of February, we'll read a short story entitled Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne. a short story entitled Soldier's Home by Ernest Hemingway, and a short story entitled Battle Royal, which appears in the novel Invisible Man, and that's by Ralph Ellison. And basically what I mean when I said assigned reading should be completed before the dates indicated is that whatever date you see and the corresponding reading, my assumption is that you've already read that prior to my class video so that the video would make a certain level of sense to you. So again, for this upcoming Thursday, hopefully you can have read Reading Imaginative Literature, Critical Strategies for Reading, and Reading Fiction prior to watching my class video. And it would continue on that way throughout the semester. And you can see that as we go to week 4, we've got a short story entitled Girl, and we've also got a short story entitled Popular Mechanics. And that would basically give us closure with our short story section. We've got a catch-up class because I tend to sometimes fall behind. And you can see that your first journal would be due around the 18th of February. So we've got a good amount of time to read some short stories and to talk about how to write a journal before you actually would do that. And then what we do is transition over into drama. So you can see that in week 5, where there are some readings about what drama is and how to read it and what are some elements we can expect in drama and how to write about drama. And then our first drama will be a drama you might have heard of before, Oedipus the King by Sophocles, very old drama, 430 BC Greece. Obviously, we'll be reading a translation. We'll talk a little bit about why that drama is so important and why it's so oftentimes read, and how dramas are meant to be performed, not read, so we will also watch a performance. A live performance would be ideal. Obviously, that's not possible, so we will have to see something that's on the internet, but at least that'll give you an idea of acting and interpretation. And we've got several classes devoted to Oedipus the King because dramas are longer, and also we would need to watch a performance as well. Your first paper on short story would be due by the 4th of March. Early papers always encouraged, but by then you would have submitted in your journal on short story, and I would have returned it back to you, and you would have had some time to write that paper. And then around the 11th or so of March is when we transition into our second drama. That happens to be from William Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream. This drama is a comedy, so it's more lighthearted than some of the pieces we'll be reading over the course of the semester. And so that was a very deliberate choice on my part to choose something a little bit more lighthearted. My training is in Shakespeare and his contemporaries, so I definitely wanted to include some Shakespeare in the class. And we'll have several classes devoted to Midsummer Night's Dream, to read the play, and also to watch a performance. I'm very well aware this is not a Shakespeare class. I also teach the Introduction to Shakespeare class. This is just an Introduction to Literature class. So obviously I don't expect you to have any kind of prior knowledge about Shakespeare. And I know very well that it oftentimes leads to a little bit of anxiety. My hope is that after we've talked about Shakespeare and seen a performance, you'll see that he really isn't that bad at all. In fact, he's quite enjoyable if you can understand what it is that he's trying to do and how he does it. So that will be my goal. And then around the 23rd or so, that week, which is week 9, is when GCC is on spring break. And that would put a year, actually, for the virus and our transition over into online classes. It's nothing short of incredible that we're in this place. But I can't begin to thank you enough for having the fortitude and the energy to be able to devote yourselves to a class during these very challenging times. And you will see that immediately after spring break, we have an advising day. So there are no classes that are scheduled on the 30th. So individuals can register for upcoming classes. And then finally, we transition to our last play, which is the additional text that I had ordered for class, A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. Much more contemporary play, written in the United States in the 1950s. So I think you'll find that to be a much more accessible play. Again, we'll watch a performance as well as do the reading of the play, because a reading is never a substitute for performance. And there'll be several classes devoted to that. So that by the time we get to approximately the 20th of April or so, we would have concluded our drama section. There is a catch-up class on the 22nd of April. And the 22nd of April is when your second journal would be due on 3 dramas. And then finally, what we do is we transition over to the last part of the semester, which is poetry. And we have to establish what poetry is, how do we read poetry, how do we write about poetry. And then we have some sample poems to read and interpret, beginning with Shakespeare. Not that there wasn't poetry before Shakespeare, but he seemed like a good place to begin. A very famous poem, a sonnet that you might have heard of before. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That would be on the 29th of April. A poem by Andrew Marvell that you may or may not know, To His Coy Mistress. Then on the 4th, we go to a poem called The Author to Her Book. I've tried to put the poetry in chronological order, so you can see that we've begun with the early 1600s. Eventually, we'll end up in present time. The earlier poems being mostly British poems, and then the latter poems being more American. You can see that we move to a poem from the 1700s in England, The Sick Rose by Blake. You might have heard of before, William Blake. Because I Could Not Stop for Death was written by Emily Dickinson, and my suspicion is that you have heard of Emily Dickinson if you live in this area. And then we'll read a poem called American Poetry that breaks the chronology, but I like this poem because it sort of anticipates some of the ways that American poetry might be different from British poetry. And I would argue that more contemporary poetry is different from, let's say, older poetry, where the older poetry helped to establish a tradition. We'll move to the 6th and talk about probably a poem you have heard of before by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And then we'll talk about a poem you may or may not have heard of before. Next to, of course, God, America, I by E.E. Cummings. A poem entitled America by Allen Ginsberg. You can see that some of these poems aren't necessarily included in the textbook, and what I've got next to that poem is handout, is what I would have done when we were meeting in class. Obviously, I'm going to try to provide as many links as possible to all of these things, so that if it turns out that you don't have access to the textbook, anything I can find online I'll be providing as that time becomes necessary over the course of the semester, or that time becomes appropriate over the course of the semester. You can see that your second paper is due on the 6th, and that happens to be on drama, early papers encouraged. Again, very similar to the first paper, except that you would be focusing on drama. And then our very last class is on the 11th, and you can see that we're ending with poems entitled The Lover Not Taken, Coca-Cola and Coco Frio, and a poem that you might have some familiarity with, which was first shared with all of us in the presidential inauguration, The Hill We Climb, which I think is just absolutely a phenomenal work. I got shivers when I first heard that poem. So, and then that would also be the day that your third journal is due. And then our final exam, which is the date that's posted at GCC for the class if we were meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. And that would be for Thursday, May 13th at 10:30 a.m. So by that point, I would have our final exam posted, where 80 points of that final would be based on poetry, where you would select 2 poems out of a handful of poems that I select that we've studied from our poetry section, and you would analyze those poems, as well as a couple questions on drama, 10 points, you choose one, and a couple questions on short story, 10 points, and you choose one. And that basically does the class as a whole. So I'm hoping that you don't have any questions about the class, that I was able to anticipate what questions you might have, because this would be the time where I would ask you, do you have any questions? So certainly, if you have any questions for me, please let me know. Send me an email, a voicemail, however it is you want to communicate with me. For our discussion question today, I thought that what we could do is try to introduce ourselves to the class, because this is something that we would have been doing in the class as a whole. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just to tell the class a little bit about yourself in our discussion forum section today. Feel free to write as much or as little as you like, but hopefully we can get a little bit of a chance to get a sense of who is in the classroom. And again, I said there are multiple sections and we're all being combined into one. So there are a good number of students in this class. So, with that said, I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and I look forward to us beginning on Thursday where we could begin talking about literature. And again, thank you for having the energy and the fortitude to take a class during these incredibly stressful times. Take care. Bye bye.